Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Strategy Skills podcast. Today's guest is Sarah Elk, who is a Bain senior partner. Just a brief background is she leads the operating model practice, and she's a senior member of the retail practice, which at some point I think was headed up by Darrell Rigby, and she's based in Chicago. So in today's episode, we're going to have a pretty interesting discussion because what Sarah has done with her team is they focus on applying agile management practices to large corporations or any corporation for that matter. And we're going to go through this with Sarah, but when I mean agile, I mean the principles that Silicon Valley startups have been applying for a very long time to get out minimum viable products as quickly as possible. They use different techniques, they use sprints, they set up things very differently, they manage it differently, and the results, I think we can agree, have been pretty astonishing if you look at the composition of NASDAQ and the FTSE 100 and so on. I mean, these digital companies, the new wave of tech companies have done pretty well. And a large part of that success has been driven by the way they manage the rollout of different initiatives. Now, Sarah has been a big part of that, working in retail, but across many different sectors. And what I really liked about this episode is that while she has obviously a clear understanding of the principles and the strategy and so on, she also has the ability to dig in to talk about specifics of how it was done because she's been a part of those initiatives. So it's one thing to talk about the strategy of Agile and so on, but it's another thing to go into the detail and say, you know what, when I worked with this executive or this team, this is what we experienced, this is what we recommended. So I enjoyed this episode a lot. And I think for many people who want to learn best practices from the leading edge tech companies, this is a good podcast to start with. Hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Excellent. Are you doing this from home or the office?
I am actually at home. We are on a strict work from home policy now.
And I believe you have 4 kids. So is it a vacation or more work?
It just makes things like this very tricky because I'll do client calls and stuff from home, but this really needs to have them not interrupt me and not fight with each other in the background. And so I sent them all out of the house, but at least in Illinois, we're, not supposed to go anywhere. So my gracious husband took them out.
That's a good husband. That's a keeper right there.
Absolutely. How's the sound quality? I have you on my Jabra speaker, but I can
No,
put
the
a headset on.
sound is very good. You don't have to worry about the sound. It's very
Perfect.
clear. It's like you're in Los Angeles with me.
Oh, that's fabulous. I lived for a year in Calabasas and thought I was going to melt.
It's
And then
very hot.
yeah, yes. And then I moved to West LA. I lived north of Culver City, south of Bel Air, east of Santa Monica, and west of Beverly Hills, sort of near Rancho Park Golf Course, if you know where that
Do you
is.
like riding horses? Is that why you went to Calabasas?
No, my husband was working in the valley and I was, as a consultant, it doesn't matter where I
Yes.
live. I just need to get to the airport. And so it was an easier commute for him. And so we tried to pick nice, but in the valley, so he wouldn't have to do the 405. And
Yeah.
I know. I was like, you're going to have to commute.
I've actually lived in Calabasas for only 1 week because I didn't like it. I stayed a week and I think I stayed 2 weeks and I didn't like it and I left and I moved because it's just a difficult place to live in. It's inconvenient.
It is. It's so far. I mean, it was nice because we went into Malibu all the time,
Yes.
but
Over
it's
the
so
mountains.
far. And it was 105. Like I just,
Well,
you lost me at like 95, like let alone 105.
were you born on the West Coast or East Coast?
I was born in the middle.
In the
I'm
middle.
from
So you're not
Iowa.
used to these extreme heat temperatures, right?
No, in Iowa it'll get into the 90s for sure. Maybe we would break 100, but it's not consistently 105 in the summer.
105 and fire storms and all kinds of terrible things can happen.
Yes, and the day we moved in, we had a baby rattlesnake in our front yard.
Oh yes, the joys of living in Los Angeles: mountain lions, rattlesnakes.
So yeah, it was great.
All these great stories. So thank you for making time available. I know it's difficult with all of this inconvenience. You probably have a diary that looks like something from hell.
It's a unique time right now. That is for sure.
But at least you can stay at home, right? There's some benefit.
Yes, and I'm actually 37 weeks pregnant, so I'm about to have my fifth child.
Congratulations. That is great news.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm trying to fit this in before I go out on mat leave, at least for a little bit, and then I'll be back at work to launch the book. But
Wow, that's
yeah,
amazing.
it's a
5
busy
kids.
time.
How do you do it? You should write a book.
No, one book is enough.
No, but I mean, like seriously, I don't think there are enough women who talk about how to manage a family and consulting because it's a difficult career, as you know.
Yes, we could do a whole different hour on that if you want
Yes.
hints and tips at some later point. But yes, it's
Yes, it's very interesting. But congratulations. I think it's a big thing. So good.
yeah, you can do it. I wear lots of different hats within Bain. I lead one of our solution areas. I lead one of our global accounts, uh, co-lead with another person, and then you know, and with the five kids,
How do you do all of that? I mean, seriously, how do you manage? I mean, honestly, this is an honest question.
you prioritize,
So you're
right?
really good at prioritizing and knowing what you have a critical path set up for everything.
Yeah, and you build a great team around you. I mean, honestly, it's not different than the principles that surround Agile and what we're talking about
Mm.
from an Agile perspective. So, it's not just me. It's a whole team of people, and we work together on lots of fun stuff. It's great. I like to say I lead a very full life. I lead life fully on all fronts.
Oh, your husband's going to be so happy when he hears this. He's part of a great team. He's going to feel so good.
Oh, my husband is amazing. Having a life partner is a big key to that equation, you
Yes.
know, for sure.
Okay,
So
so this is a good segue into Agile. We're not going to do an intro now. We'll do it at the end once I listen to everything and I think of how I'm going to summarize it. But I think a good place to start is maybe just to introduce, if you could just introduce yourself to the audience, because I've read about your bio and so on, but just a brief background of where you're from and how you ended up at Bain and the work you're doing there.
sure. So let's see. How far back do you want me to start? Like
Interesting part.
college?
Yeah, let's go to college. It's always good to see the formative years.
Oh goodness. So I thought that I was going to save the world as an environmental engineer.
Yeah.
I became passionate about environmental engineering in high school. And at the time, there weren't that many programs that were
Hmm.
strictly about environmental engineering. And I was lucky enough to get into Northwestern and studied engineering there. Got a great job in healthcare with a pharmaceutical company doing environmental engineering. And
Okay.
like most good college kids, started work and then realized that that was not the career for me.
Hmm.
So about a year into that, I decided to get another degree, decided to pursue an MBA, was going to go part-time, and then studied for the GMAT, took the GMAT, and did well enough on the GMAT that I was like, well, maybe I should consider going full-time. And my husband, who's amazing, was super
Hmm.
supportive and said, yes, you should definitely apply. And we were on the East Coast at the time. So I applied to the part-time school that my employer would pay for,
Hmm.
plus a handful of other big names, and didn't really know what I was doing. And I was lucky enough to get into Stanford,
Hmm. Hmm.
which I still don't know how I got into Stanford. My engineering
So
manager
modest, Sarah.
hand wrote one of my recommendations, which I think is astounding looking
Yes.
back. But I grew up in Iowa. Like, I'm a simple girl from the middle of the country,
Mhm. Yeah.
and had never been to California. So we moved to California, did business school at Stanford, graduated in the downturn in '02,
Oh, wow.
and was trying to figure out what I should do. I had an offer to go back into pharmaceuticals, which
Yeah.
I didn't want to do because I didn't want to do engineering and I wasn't really excited about a sales role, and decided to go into consulting. I could park myself there for a year. My husband actually decided to go back to business school too. He was a year behind me. And so I needed to be mobile and flexible. And so I figured, oh, I'll just do consulting for a year. And I got a great offer from a boutique firm.
Yeah.
And I ended up really liking it. So I did 5 years of consulting with a boutique firm, and then ended up switching into Bain when the boutique firm did an acquisition that I thought was a bad idea, and have been at Bain ever since.
Wow. So you've been at Bain a really long time.
What has it been now? 2007, I joined Bain.
13
So
years.
Yeah, it's been a while. I don't feel that old, but thank you.
No, you don't. You're amazing. You don't have to worry about anyone using the word old to describe you. You've been there 13 years, and now your role is not just, you have multiple roles at Bain, right? Can you give us a summary of that?
Yeah, so I came in as an experienced manager hire, which is a little bit unique because I switched firms. Did my path to partner. I was in the LA office at the time, and then was promoted to partner on a major tech transformation. Then did a bunch of work in healthcare, doing
Mhm.
large healthcare transformations, in part because I needed to get to the Midwest. My mom's health was failing, and so I transferred to Chicago, and Bain was super supportive.
Mhm.
But my passion was more of the engineering kind of stuff. Like I liked things with
Yes.
engines and machines, and I had done work in automotive, and so then I did a bunch of work in aerospace and other big things with engines,
Yes.
and then had an opportunity to do work for a large retail client where I've spent the bulk of my time the last several years. And so I'm a little bit of an anomaly in that I've moved around practices, but the
Yeah.
common thread is sort of large corporate transformations. I'm just fascinated by big companies trying to do great things. And that has led me to a hat that I wear, which is leading our operating model solution, which is our organizational transformation
Hmm.
solution area within Bain.
Is that a practice that you
That
founded, or
I do that. I lead, I still lead one of our large retail accounts with another colleague of mine. And then I wear various other sort of internal role hats as well.
So is this how you got into agile and lean thinking, because of the transformation work you were doing?
Yeah. And, driving change at very large companies is hard.
Yeah,
And
very
so
hard.
when you spend a lot of time thinking about that, I was approached by my colleague Darrell Rigby,
Yeah.
who I think is an absolute genius. He would be embarrassed if he heard me say that, but he he's an incredible person, and he approached me last January and said, "Hey, I've got this project that sort of fell in our lap. He had been approached by HBR Press, and do you want to team up and do it?" And so we built a cross-functional team. Darrell's an
Mhm.
expert in Agile. I'm an expert in
Mhm.
organization,
Mhm.
and Steve Berez is an expert in tech.
Mhm.
And the three of us came together to write the book.
So that's how. So basically, the book is a summary of the work you've been doing over many years.
Yeah, the book represents our client experience, it
Mhm.
represents our beliefs, and I think part of the impetus for writing it is what we were seeing in the market around Agile almost becoming a fad,
Yes.
or a lot of negative press or sort of people turning away from it. And in
Mhm.
our view, it's a really valuable and practical tool, and we didn't want it to end up on the scrap heap of management topics over the
Yes.
years.
So I just want to touch on something here, because you said that people are turning away from agile. So my view is that not enough companies are using agile practices for them to even begin turning away from it. It's not. It's something that can still be adopted by more companies.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting because a lot of companies have experimented,
yeah.
particularly in their IT department.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Not everyone, but many. And because it's isolated and not well connected to the business, it hasn't reached its full potential. And depending on your beliefs going in, and there's lots of different beliefs about, Agile as a silver bullet,
Yes.
some executives are disappointed and saying, well, Agile's not living up to what it said it was supposed to be. And so there's just a lot of confusion over what it is, what it isn't. Is it a team methodology? Is it a mindset? How do I apply it? And we just wanted to set the record straight on our experience in a really pragmatic way on what it takes to do it well, because when you do it well, you unlock so much potential in your business.
So let's go back to some basics here, just for the audience, right? When you say agile, you are referring to a way of managing the business, or you're referring to the dictionary definition of agile? Because I think the audience is going to get confused on that.
Yes, and so do companies. So it's a great question. We think about Agile at sort of three different levels.
Mhm.
There's Agile team methodology. So perhaps that's something like Scrum or Kanban, which
Yeah.
is a specific way of working that a team might deploy.
Okay.
There is Agile at scale. So when a company gets many Agile teams running,
So just to explain this to the audience, that means there's many teams using Kanban or Scrum, right?
yeah, or whatever methodology they
Okay.
choose. There's, companies also come up with their own methodologies, but it's a particular way of working on a team where you have small cross-functional teams that have a specific
Mhm.
mission with a specific way of working, typically geared towards innovation or some sort of change that's very customer focused with a
Yeah.
heavy prototyping or sort of test and learn
Yeah.
approach
Okay, good.
to
There's
their
a
way of
third way of
working.
thinking about it. What is the third way?
And so then you get many of these agile teams, and that, we sort of call that agile at scale.
Mhm.
And then there's becoming truly an agile enterprise.
Wait,
And
just that where the whole organization is operating in an agile way.
the whole organization isn't necessarily running agile teams, but you have to change your business process and what we would call your operating model. And we can talk about the components of that in order to allow traditional bureaucracy, which we think is still valuable, to work at its best alongside and in conjunction with agile innovation teams. So we are
Okay.
not believers that an entire company should run exclusively on agile teams.
Hmm.
There is still a strong role for traditional bureaucracy, sort of what you would think of as a traditional org chart, where you have a supervisor and direct
Yeah.
reports, accomplishing tasks, because that's where you start to have quality, repeatability, all the things that Lean Six Sigma would espouse
Yeah.
are necessary and good for activities that are well suited for that type of operating model or organizational structure.
Yeah,
But
that
not
makes sense.
all work is well suited for that.
So what you're saying is that in an ideal situation, the parts of the companies that benefit from agile should go agile, and the parts that don't benefit should stay the way they are, but learn how to support the agile teams.
Correct.
Okay, I like that. I'm going to ask a question that everyone's going to be thinking. If a company goes to the most mature level of being agile, is that the same as saying that it is very flexible in being able to respond to what's happening in the market?
If you also change a bunch of other things.
Okay, so what
So,
would be the other things we would need to change?
right. So just having an agile team in and of itself means that you could have one specific mission that that team is focused on with fully dedicated resources, doing that in a highly productive and customer centric way. Great. That's good progress.
Okay.
That does not make you into an agile enterprise. The difference in how we think about that is that agile enterprises focus on creating this agile business system,
Hmm.
and the components of that cut across all the aspects of your operating model. So when we think about how we define an operating model, it's not just your structures and accountabilities, i.e., I set up an agile team. It also includes your management system. So how do you
Okay.
do budgeting,
Yes.
resource allocation, reviewing of your business? It includes your leadership and culture. So broader, like how does the leadership team work? The top team, for example, the CEO's direct reports need to come together in a different way and spend their
Hmm.
time differently. It includes changes to your talent system
Hmm.
and the talent that you have in your company. And it includes changes in what you have set up and how you use technology and data. And
Mm.
ultimately, your underlying business process that then connects all those components evolves.
So let's start with some basic questions, right? So what makes Agile so different from the, I suppose, traditional approaches companies are using to manage innovation and being more responsive to customers?
Well, it's all of those things, right? If you're going to
I know
have,
it's maybe a very broad question. Let me just bring it down to something very simple, right? So let's assume you've got two teams trying to get out an app. One is using a traditional approach of excessive planning, budgeting, spending 2 years to get it out. What would be different about a team pushing out an app if they were using the agile approach?
great, so common problems. Let's
Okay.
imagine you're the team doing the traditional approach. You probably have fragmented resources.
Yeah.
So I have 10% or 20% of my time as part of this team. versus being fully dedicated, which means
Okay,
by
that's a big
definition,
one.
I'm just going slower.
Yeah.
I don't have access to leadership quickly to get my issues resolved or get the input that I need. And so I end up waiting between milestones, whether that's sort of an initiative review or a steering committee. I can't quickly pivot or get the resources that I need. I'm probably working on something all the way until the end before I test it with customers.
Yeah, that's a big one, yeah.
And so my actual end solution is not nearly as good as it could have been or should have been because
Yes.
I haven't gotten the right level of feedback. The direction that was set out at the beginning by management may have been dictated by their experience as opposed to what testing results would say. And so
Yeah,
I like to say that leaders should stop speaking for customers.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good
Let
point.
the customers speak for themselves.
Yeah.
So you end up in, and I could go on and on and on. You probably don't have the right talent or people on the team. It's not cross-functional. It's too hard to get those people pulled out and applied. And so you're probably working too much in a silo, on and on. But the net impact of that is that you don't end up with as good of a solution. You don't end up with a solution as quickly as you could have or should have. And then you end up with the problem of it was done sort of in the vacuum and on the side and not connected to all of the people who are running the business typically.
Yes.
And then you can't scale it because the hardest part is not actually generating the solution. The hardest part is getting the solution embedded in your business, driving results and allowing you to have that solution be at scale and serve your customers.
Well, so what's interesting here is that the word customer came up, I think 13 times I counted. So it sounds as if you are shifting the focus away from doing what bureaucracy wants you to do to doing what customers need you to do, which is a bit scary because you're telling a team to engage with a customer and push out things to customers. And I'm guessing companies like banks and pharmaceuticals like to go through 10 years of testing.
Yeah, and so to be clear, leadership is setting the direction, right?
Yes.
So if the leadership team is coming together as an agile strategy team themselves, then they're spending more time on the backlog and setting the missions of what these innovation teams should go do.
Okay, so they are setting the overall priority.
Right. So they're commissioning and decommissioning teams, let's say.
I like that word.
You have the number of teams you have will vary based on your company and your business context and industry context. So you might have lots of innovation going on. You might have a little innovation going on.
Yes.
I use customer generously to mean external revenue generating customers as well as internal customers.
Okay.
So I may have, actual consumer facing or B2B customer facing solutions, but those may also require changes in process and technology where I'm trying to improve my skill set. So if I'm, let's say I'm a retailer and I have, merchants who are buying goods that I then sell, I may need a suite of tools for my merchants. That's an internal customer.
Yes.
But still important.
Very important, yes.
And so as we think about digitization and where we need to apply tech and data and create holistic experiences, they're not just for our external customers, they're for our internal customers as well. And so I have all of this activity going on.
Is it fair to say that this is hard to apply if you don't have access to external customers?
I really think that it could apply to any business. A business has a mission and a purpose and needs to continue to improve and change how it's doing whatever it needs to do in order to deliver on that mission and purpose.
Oh, no, I'm not referring to different businesses. I mean, if you're setting up a team that's using Agile, that team has to have access to customers, whether internal or external, so they can get real-time feedback in terms of what they're doing.
Yes.
So I would say that's one of the conditions for Agile to work well.
Yeah, so if you are going to prototype something, you have to have a way to get customer feedback.
So I'm going to ask you the question that I was thinking about right at the beginning. If you look at the companies that have applied Agile, and the articles by Bain give a few examples of that, good examples, they've done very well. So why is there now a sentiment that Agile is not working? What's driving that?
I think people have done Agile poorly. So there
Yes.
are companies that we would say are doing Agile wrong.
Okay.
I think or it's insufficient. Again, it's expectations versus what it takes to actually transition to a
Yeah.
more agile enterprise. Just standing up a team is insufficient. That team won't
Yeah.
be successful, for example. There are misapplications of agile. Agile is a tool, not a strategy.
Yes.
And just like you wouldn't use a chainsaw to do heart surgery, there are places where you shouldn't apply agile. And so if you start applying agile in places where you should have bureaucracy,
Yeah.
you're probably going to be upset with the results.
So the government
Um,
is never going to have agile thinking, is what you're saying.
well, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I think there are lots of places where we would all agree the government needs to innovate and do things differently.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's that. But bureaucracy is great for where you want hierarchical authority, where you want specialized division of labor, where you want standard operating procedures. I don't want to get on a plane and not have my pilot check the safety checklist.
Yes, true.
Like standard operating procedures are good and necessary. That's what makes operations have minimal variability. The application of proven practices, it
Yeah.
makes them repeatable and scalable. Those are all good things. And so, there's another sort of set of problems where Agile is being misapplied. A third area would be Agile being used for abrupt cost cutting.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen a lot of examples where companies have gone in and taken 30 or 40% of their headcount out, lost expertise, done it in what we would call a big bang approach.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden you've got all of these people in new jobs and you haven't rewired how things are going to work. And it's not meant for cost cutting. Will you get efficiencies from becoming a more agile enterprise? Of course, but that will happen over time as you start to shift and realize what talent you need. When you start to dedicate people more to specific innovation missions, you'll realize you don't actually have the right
Yes.
people that you need, and you'll start to find efficiencies and shift things around. And a bunch of the innovation that's probably going on in your company isn't the right innovation anyway once you apply the right lens to it,
Mm-hmm.
and start to prototype and test and actually get that customer feedback. So there are efficiencies to be gained, but that's not the reason why you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's missteps around believing it's this panacea of cost cutting that also has created some issues.
So you've sort of led me into this question, which I'll ask. So what is the number one reason for introducing agile, and if it's appropriate, scaling it in your organization?
To create a better way of achieving the ultimate purpose or mission of your company.
I
So
like
if
that.
today I am too bureaucracy focused and not changing enough, and we live in a world of disruption,
Yes.
most companies are trying to figure out, how do I be more innovative, have more adaptability? How do I keep pace with competitors? And this is a great tool to enable you to do that if you have clarity on the direction and strategy that you're trying to go. And so we talk about it as balance and striking the right balance across these pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
every company that I've seen needs more balance across sort of run the business and change the
Yes.
business.
I would imagine it introduces quite a lot of tension, because imagine you've got a team that's operating on agile. They start off, and then as they progress and they learn more about what works with customers, what doesn't work, they're going to be making changes to their budgets all the time. And how does that work with companies that generally work on a yearly budgeting cycle? How do you manage that tension?
So you end up having a way that you're staffing your agile teams and the budgets that they need, and you do that more frequently than annual. So if I'm an agile team and I get stood up, I probably have sort of initial seed money, let's say, if we're applying venture capital terms, and I'm going to say, here's the idea or the mission that I'm going to give this team. Here's an initial set of money, because we don't really know what it's going to cost.
Yes, that's
Typically
research.
teams are 4x off. They're either 25% of what they thought it was going to cost, or they're 400%.
Yes.
Here's an initial set of money, go learn. And they come back with what they've learned, and then more clarity on the direction that they need to go. And so you end up let's say, releasing funds much more frequently for your innovation, but we're not yet to the point where those need to scale. And once you're further down the path and say you're not sort of early stage, you're more late stage venture capital, or you've got a more proven idea, then you're ready to build it into your annual operating budget, and you've got a much better sense of the value and cost that's actually required as you move that from the handful of places that you've tested it, whatever's appropriate for your business, to a full rollout to the entire company.
So the role of finance moves away from command and control to support. Is that a nice way of thinking about it?
Part of the role of finance,
Part of
right? Remember, we're still running the business. We still have, let's say we're manufacturing plants or whatever else our business entails. Annual budgeting doesn't necessarily go away. You just need to layer on and treat how you fund innovation in a more fit for purpose way to innovation, instead of funding it like you would fund your traditional bureaucracy.
So finance has to realize that different parts of the business need to be run in different ways.
Yeah, and the historic way of handling change would be really detailed business cases with 5-year plans, and you may not know all of that up front. And so you have to adapt. Finance needs to adapt how they approach the aspect of sort of funding and control around innovation.
And in your work, have you found that some parts of the world are more open to the style of doing agile, where maybe other cultures are more leaning into more traditional long-term planning, or you find that it's the same across the world?
I think I've seen more differences by industry than geography.
Oh, that's interesting. By industry.
Yeah, so industries that are much more disrupted are much more leaning in. Okay. So financial services would be a great example, or insurance, retail as an example. These are industries that are ongoing, and I don't want to say they're sort of in chaos, but there's just a lot more external pressure.
There's a lot of excitement. Let's say that.
That's a perfect way to say it. There's a lot of excitement, and so given the level of excitement, there's an openness. We're starting to see much more demand in consumer goods, where traditional approaches to innovation and consumer packaged goods are not keeping up with insurgent brands.
Yes.
And insurgent companies, and so that will change.
Which sectors are more are taking longer to be more open to this?
Sectors that are probably less consumer driven, are more longer, are heavier capex and longer capex cycles.
Like building of power stations, maybe.
Something like mining.
Yes. That's true.
You just need agile less. Again, it's not that it isn't, it's there, it's just not as critical.
The mining response times work in years, right?
Right.
So versus consumer products where you can work in weeks if you want to.
Right. Big capex,
Sarah, you can work
5 to 20-year life cycle is just a different ball game.
But even so, there are opportunities to use agile within mining companies and resources companies, right?
Absolutely.
It's just about. I think what you're saying is that it's about making sure the executive team knows the appropriate way to use agile given the type of sector they're in.
Right.
And did you?
So you don't. I mean, no. Said another way, no business is static.
Yes.
No business is completely chaotic.
Yes.
From a market standpoint, you want to find that happy medium.
Yeah.
And it'll be different by industry.
Yes. This is a good it's a good point you're making. It's not as if you can take agile and there's a playbook which you just throw into the company and everyone does it the same way. You've got to adapt it for your organization.
Correct.
And I feel
Because
maybe
the
that's
balance
why,
I need, even if we're in the same industry, the
yeah.
balance I need given my strategy may be completely different than the balance a different company needs.
Yeah, I
In
mean, if
terms
you
of the
look
type
at,
of innovation I'm trying to drive, how much change I'm wanting to introduce, what my starting point is for my leadership and culture,
if you,
etc.
if you look at just banks, for example, right? Some banks are big into wealth management. Others have the bulk of their profits and revenue coming from other types of banking. So I'm guessing if you just look at banks, you'd say they're the same sector, but depending on how they make money, the way they're going to introduce agile would differ
Hmm.
because there are very, very different sources of revenue and the cycles around their revenue.
Right.
So talking about banking, I'm going to use banking as an example here, but feel free to use whatever sector you're comfortable talking about. You spoke earlier about the need for there to be bureaucracy in some companies because following regulations is something we need because it obviously protects consumers. So in an example like a bank, I mean, how do you get that balance between letting teams be agile and then at the same time using bureaucracy to protect consumers? I think people would want to know what's the best ways of doing that.
I wouldn't think of bureaucracy as only being necessary where you have regulation.
Okay, that's true.
Again, it would be anything where you're trying to have high quality, repeatable
Yes.
efficiency. So some of that work will get automated over time. So if
Mhm.
you think about any kind of processing work, whether that's
Yeah.
mortgage processing or an insurance like claims processing. In retail, it's stocking shelves.
Yes.
There are standard operating procedures and routines that are helpful that somebody a different innovation team may be working on making those routines or standard operating procedures better and testing those, but the vast majority of people who are in those types of situations are so to speak running the play, right? There's
Yes.
a way to do it that has been defined as the best way to do it based on everything we know right now. And what those types of activities are will obviously be different for every company in the examples I just gave, but every company will have a mix of bureaucracy and innovation. And for many companies, the vast majority of people will be doing the exact same jobs they're doing today. So even
Mm.
if I fully transition and become
Yeah.
an agile enterprise, 70% of my workforce is doing this sort of repeatable core business, traditionally structured bureaucratic work, and that's a good thing.
Mhm.
That's not a bad thing. It's that I need to get the innovation side further invested in and rebalanced. I need a different way of working there, and that will require changes on
Mhm.
the more traditional side. But it's not that you're completely turning it upside down or turning that into agile teams. They need to be able to accept the changes and realize those. And so it's more about how are you building in the connection across innovation and bureaucracy versus not honoring the bureaucracy side.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. It's a good choice of words. It's about saying a company needs a variety of skills and each side needs to respect each other and work together, as opposed to agile replacing everyone and making them redundant, which is what some companies try to do, which is a bad way to do it.
Right. Yeah, I often use a retail example because it's sort of easy to wrap your head around. Everybody understands what it
Yeah.
means to go into a grocery store, for example. And so if you're a store manager of a grocery store and, if retail's being really disrupted, I'm going to be changing probably how I receive truckloads of goods. I'm going to be changing how I stack the shelves and automation and sort of handheld tools for
Yeah.
employees to do that. How my employees team together in the store may be different. I'm probably moving to more self-checkout or changing the technology and equipment at the front. I may have an app. I may be doing pickup and delivery. There's a lot of changes that I need to be able to catch and implement at the store level, even though I'm sort of the bureaucracy
Yes.
side of the business that's running the play. And so it isn't that there's no change for those people. It's that I'm just not asking you to invent the solution.
Mm.
You may be a test store, which would be something to be celebrated. You may get certain things before other stores because of your connection back to certain innovation teams. But then when things are ready to roll to all stores, you need to be able to receive them and implement them. And that's the piece that's new and different as we think about the connection across. And there's lots of ways to support landing that change in the store successfully, if we use that as an example.
Yeah, that's a good example. I like that example. I was thinking about a sports analogy. It's almost like football or soccer, whereby the coach calls the play. He knows that the opposition has a weak defense. He's going to put in a lot of strikers and attack the defense. That's the play he calls, but he gives the striker a lot of freedom in terms of how he's going to execute the play. Is that a good way of thinking about it? And then the striker has to work closely with the other team members and make sure that they know what he's doing, but he's got the freedom to innovate on the field.
Yeah, I think it'll vary by context, right?
Yes, definitely.
If I'm running inventory, let's say a certain way in a store, in order for the accuracy of my inventory data to be right, I probably need to run the play more exactly as the coach called it,
Yes.
because not doing that means my data may be wrong,
Yeah.
and then the customer won't know what I actually have in the store.
Yes.
There are probably other situations where there's a lot more flexibility in how it gets implemented. So I think that may vary.
Yeah. So you
But
actually don't
certainly
want
during
your
the,
accountant to be very creative and innovative when you're submitting your tax returns. That's basically where you don't want too much creativity.
well, it's where you channel it, right? I mean, the front line has amazing ideas, which is
Yeah.
why prototyping and testing through the front line and with customers is so valuable. That's a good thing.
Yes.
It's just, you know, when do you actually move that idea to test, and how do you move that idea to test? So taking the idea that the striker may have on the field, is that something that they should implement right now, or is that feedback that you provide to the coach and you run it on the next play in a systematic way where you can learn from that and then build it into the solution or not?
So does this mean that B2C companies tend to be more easier to implement agile versus B2B companies, which tend to operate in slightly longer cycles? Or is there no
Depends on
distinction?
so the cycle time is more important than B2C or B2B,
Yes, the cycle time.
because
Yeah.
it's the feedback loop, right? So some B2B companies, get a lot of feedback. And so I think you'd have some B2B companies that would be upset by that statement. But certainly long
I
cycle
don't mean to
industries,
offend any B2B
it's
company,
harder.
just so we're clear.
Yeah, if you're listening, don't be offended.
Yeah, that makes
But
sense. For
yes, that's
example,
right.
like a company that deals with the back end of software powering other companies, they're getting real-time data 24 hours a day. So their feedback loop and feedback cycle is very short, very compressed. And they
Right.
should be able to respond faster.
But even an automaker, right? So
Yeah.
if my cycle time for buying a car is, I don't know, let's make it up, 7 years, there's still lots of ways to get feedback and drive improvements. And so how are you creating a way to release improvements, even if it's a long cycle time? And what are the different mechanisms by which you can capture that feedback, whether that's data coming from the car
Mm.
directly, or other interactions that you can be pulling data from. There's so many different sources of data now.
And it's
And I
also
think,
it's also having the ability to push out changes rapidly, having the infrastructure to do that.
right, you would need a Tesla like release cycle where you can push out new software to the car, or create mechanisms by which you can drive improvements for customers even though you have a long cycle time product.
Yes. So that's interesting. So let's just step back a second here, right? Because the reason for the book and one of the reasons for the book is to get executives to understand that agile, if done right and applied appropriately, could have the results they want. So if I'm an executive and I'm running an initiative to roll out agile, it doesn't matter on the maturity and scale, what are the things I should be thinking about to see if I'm doing it correctly or incorrectly? How do I assess this?
So agile wrong versus agile right, let me just sort of give you some phrases or ideas that we
Mhm.
think about. So agile is a panacea versus a balanced agile system.
Okay.
Quick big bang transformation versus using agile approaches to increase agility. So sort of agiling your way to agile, using test and learn appropriate for your organization is the way that you get there.
Okay.
Applying bureaucratic program management versus, again, using an agile way of working to get there. Thinking that agile is only for your subordinates
Mm-hmm.
versus applying agile principles and mindsets at the top, sort of this notion of the top team being an agile strategy team, as an example, and where leadership time goes changes. Thinking that agile is only for IT versus applying agile broadly across
Mm-hmm.
lots of areas of change in your company.
Yeah.
Thinking agile is for layoffs versus agile being more for, innovation and improving capability in your company. Using agile as a cover for micromanagement, which happens, versus truly embracing agile for the learning,
Yes.
coaching, and unleashing of the full potential of people that is what should be happening. And then, using agile rigidly, almost like there's rules, versus really tailoring and applying agile to what's going to work in your culture and your environment and your company.
I like that. That's a very good set of principles to think about. Because I don't think you can give people a test. It's every company has got to look at this and say, is agile working for me against these considerations you've provided? In that list, you mentioned something about the management team using agile principles to run the company. And in one of the articles I read, I think it was something Darrell wrote about how companies can use agile to develop their strategy. Is it something we can talk about more? Because most companies are used to setting a strategy over a few months and then running it doggedly for 2 years and then seeing the results. So how has agile changed that?
So at the top, you would have, a sustaining purpose or mission or, you know, specific maybe financial goal, sort of longer term, 3 to 5 years, or maybe, your everlasting mission.
Mm-hmm.
You translate that into the different things that you think you need to go do to achieve that. And the leadership team holds that set of ideas. And when you transition to an agile leadership team, you basically run that as if it's the backlog for the leadership team. So you know what ideas you've resourced that are out there that are being worked in the business, and you know the set of ideas that you would love to filter in that maybe you don't have the resources for right now, and you're managing that dynamically as you're describing. So you're standing down things that you think aren't working after some sufficient time period. You're adding in new things, you're shifting resources. Knowing what's on your backlog means you can do better talent planning. But the net impact of all of that is that for leadership teams that make this transition after about 3 years, they go from spending 10% of their time on strategy development and growth to about 40% of their time across all of those types of activities that I described.
But that's a good thing because they're actually doing things as opposed to just planning, right?
Right. So they're understanding the customer better. They're doing more market and competitive analysis. They're prioritizing and sequencing the ideas and initiatives that they want to go after as a leadership team, sort of putting your hat on for the greater good of the company versus just representing your silo.
Yes.
You're thinking about business case development, strategy alternatives and choices. You're operating in a much more transparent and collaborative way as a team. And the net impact of that is that if you're shifting much more time towards strategy and strategy development and growth, you're taking that out of operations management.
Mm.
And so you are attending, fewer, usually low value operational reviews. You
Yes.
might be doing fewer financial reviews and delegate some of that down. You're probably focusing less on administrative work or, other things that tend to suck up leadership time that seem like crises of the moment, but are not actually. And, this whole notion of delegation comes up a lot when we get into this topic,
Yes.
and it makes leaders really nervous. And what we aren't saying is to blindly delegate your business down to the next level of leaders.
Yes.
What we are saying is that it's a leader's job to build the trustworthiness of their team.
Hmm.
So in the same way that I wouldn't give my teenage son the car keys the day after he gets his driver's license and tell him, hey, go take your 5 favorite buddies and like cruise around town, have fun. I would give him the car keys and say, can you run to the grocery store on the corner and get a gallon of milk and come back? And hopefully he
Yes.
doesn't hit anything on the way. Right?
Yeah.
So you're building that trust with intentionality, and it's on the leader to do that, which is a different way of thinking than most leaders have thought about it in the past, at least based on our experience.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
not
very
that
good.
all of a sudden you're blindly handing operations to the next level down and hoping that your business stays on track.
No, it's about purpose. So 2 points jump out to me. One is that it sounds if you do this right, you're allowing different parts of the organization to focus on the things they should focus on. Like management can spend more time thinking and planning and strategy. But the other thing I noticed is that, and I could be wrong, but it sounds as if the agile teams are interacting with customers, internal and external, they've got to be able to feed what they're seeing quickly up the organization so that the management team can force rank things and set priorities. So does this cause almost a flattening of the organizational structure? Or is that just, it doesn't really matter if agile is done right?
You create stronger connection between the innovation teams and the leadership team.
So that
Yes.
definitely happens.
One, yes. So one example of that that we profile in the book is Bosch Power Tools. So
Hmm.
they, over the course of 3 years, worked their way through all of their 6 business units within Power Tools to make this agile transition. And in one of the business units in particular, they have a bunch of agile teams set up, and there's a cascading way that communication happens
Hmm.
across 3 levels, from what they call their sort of business owner, who's sort of the head of a certain entrepreneurial part of the business, can raise an impediment or a problem or something they need a decision or input on, to the next level of management, and then ultimately to the top. And the business unit leader has their 40 most important sort of change initiatives and priorities that they run as a board, and like literally a physical board on the wall.
Yeah.
And they have a daily, well, not a daily, they have a twice a week stand up where the leadership team or the people that are required come together around that board, and there's somebody that facilitates. And for, you get sort of 1 to 2 minutes to raise your issue, and you either make the decision right there, you decide that it needs a separate discussion, or they reserve the back 30 minutes of they block an hour,
Yeah.
they run the front part for 30, and then they hold the back 30 minutes for smaller group discussions on specific issues. But that allows you to have 2 times a week that you can escalate an issue where, you're trying to decide if you want to pivot left or right, if it's a sales or a growth problem, or, some other impact to the business, or, something where the team needs input. And you can get that much more quickly than if you were having, monthly steering committee meetings or something like that. And so
Yeah,
it's
this is good.
completely changed the way the leadership team runs.
So is it fair to look at it as almost a portfolio of agile initiatives they're running, and they've got to think about which ones are going to be prioritized as new information comes up?
So the teams drive that process bottom up. But yes, initially the leadership team said, here are the 40 most important things that we're going to create visibility to for this escalation. And meanwhile, sales is still selling power tools, we're still manufacturing power tools, we're still doing all the things that we need to do. But where we're trying to drive innovation in the business, we're leading it and managing it completely different, with much greater frequency and connectivity across the organization.
And then as the agile teams roll out and they start doing things and testing things, they start feeding that information back to the management team to help them understand what's the priorities.
Yeah, so if a priority needs to change, then that would come out of the learning.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it may be here's how we are shifting to do it better, or, we have a resource need. A lot of it is resource needs, whether that's people, OpEx, or, based on what we're seeing that is the best customer solution, that may mean that we actually need to pivot manufacturing in a certain way. Do we want to explore that? Is that on the table or off the table? Because that might have been outside the boundary of my specific mission as a team. And so does that then create a new mission, or does somebody else look into that, or how should we handle that?
Okay, so here's a question.
Just as examples. It could be anything, but those are some examples.
Most people, I'm going to take a stab here and say a lot of people, maybe not most people, the exposure to Agile has been watching the HBO hit comedy Silicon Valley. There's a whole episode dedicated to Agile. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's interesting.
I have not. I've heard about it, but
I think you should watch it. So if you are meeting an executive who has heard about the concept of Agile, but doesn't know what it is, so has asked you, Sarah, to talk to him about how do you explain to someone what is Agile, who doesn't have necessarily thought it through, but has heard of all these other concepts in management. How do you get them to understand what is different and how they should think about this?
Well, I would first start with why is Agile appealing?
Mm-hmm.
And it's appealing because it addresses the needs of so many stakeholders. So customers, have needs and frustrations that need to be addressed. Business leaders want to lead great companies that can thrive in this unpredictable world of accelerating change. Employees want to live and work like humans and reach their full potential, and often feel like they're capable of doing far more than what they're allowed to do.
Yes.
Shareholders want more profitable growth. Companies want to take longer term perspectives. Communities want companies to find more creative ways to serve society. All of those things are easier when you use Agile as a tool to drive change in your business, and when you shift to being this more balanced enterprise. So I think it starts with a clear view of why.
I like that.
And then you can get into, okay, well, what does that mean? That means that I'm going to have teams that are working in different ways. And then here are the other things that need to change ultimately, and how my company operates and my operating model that need to support those teams in order for the whole system to be successful.
I like that there was not a technical word in that entire description, because everyone thinks and they know it comes from the tech side, but you've explained it purely from a business interest side.
Yeah, and to be clear, Agile was around long before tech.
So where does Agile originate from?
This is where we need Darrell to really give me the...
Probably, I'm guessing that somewhere there was government funding with the Department of Defense. I'm almost sure of it.
But I know that it's been used for over 30 years. I mean, it's been used in the manufacture of complex aircraft and things like that for years.
So it came from outside software, and the software adopted it.
Correct.
The principles predate software.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Well, that would make sense.
Like I said, I'm not a 40-year expert in Agile, so those who actually wrote the manifesto can come after me with pitchforks, but that's my understanding. Yeah.
So what's the future of Agile? I mean, what are the changes? What are the leading adoptees of Agile doing that other people will maybe do in 3 to 4 years?
I hope that we find more companies adopting it for all the reasons that we've talked about, but with an understanding that it's a tool that should be applied in certain places with appropriate use, so that you realize the benefits that you should be realizing.
Okay, makes sense.
So that's really we want Agile to become and be viewed as the valuable and practical tool that it really is, rather than a frustrating fad. And
I like that. That's very good.
My view is that all of that hype happens when things are overused or misapplied to the actual problem that it's trying to solve. Because when you do it right, your organization and your people are far happier and more successful. And that a great outcome would be that we have more people looking back in 5 years with pride and fulfillment about their agile transition, because you can do it without generating fear,
Mm.
and you should be having fun.
Yes.
Our overarching principle is that if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
Yeah. I mean, I like that. It's a very good answer, because what you normally find with any management concept or tool or idea that gains traction is that when management starts thinking about it, they forget it's just one of the things you need to use, but they have this view it's going to solve every problem if they go all in. And what you're saying is that you got to have a mature way of thinking about it and how you apply it in your organization. And then you can get the results you want. Is that a fair way of thinking about it?
I think so. There's a level of pragmatism here,
Yes.
and that's really what's going to drive results.
Yeah, I like that. Pragmatism. Because people, whenever they hear about a tool, see articles in the Harvard Business Review, they don't take the time to think about, how do I make this work for me? How to take a mature way of rolling this out slowly in phases, testing it, getting results, adopting it for the unique needs of my business, and then scaling it. It's about being pragmatic or mature in the way you think about it. And then
Right.
you can get the results you want.
And applying it, as you're saying, to your business and the way that's going to work for your business.
Yeah, I
For
don't
the
know.
love of God, please do not take tribes and squads and copy the Spotify model and just roll that into your structure and call it done.
I
Like, that
actually
would
know of
make
a
me look.
company that case studied Spotify and adopted everything that Spotify did, and it was an absolute disaster for them.
Yeah,
It makes
because it's
sense.
not tailored. And by the way, the structure change is the least important part.
Yeah, and also don't use words like tribes if you live in an emerging markets economy. It has a very different connotation there. It's obviously going to fail, right? It's about these
Yeah.
cultural differences that you must understand. And in that
Oh
particular
my goodness.
case, the CEO was a big fan of Spotify, the business model, and he adopted it without thinking through just the nuances of tailoring things.
Yes, this is not a topic to cut and paste and copy on. So hopefully that was already clear to everyone, but good that
I
we
don't know.
made the
Sometimes you
point
have to
just
say
in
these
case.
things, right? I think that, obviously you have a lot of passion for the topic. You know a lot about it. If you read the work Darrell and your colleagues did, I mean, you guys understand it, but I think sometimes when the reader looks at it, they sometimes forget that enthusiasm doesn't mean it is the solution to everything. It's about applying the solution in a thoughtful way.
Absolutely.
That balance is very important. I enjoyed speaking to you so much. You're such a delightful person to chat to. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, hopefully everybody was entertained.
I think they were
It's a
entertained. I have
fun
to
topic.
tell
It's a
you
passionate topic. So,
that, I read a lot of articles and books, but this one was very interesting to me because I've seen Agile implemented in different places as a consultant, but I've never had anyone take a helicopter view and say, this is what's happening at Agile across the world, across industries. These are the trends. And I've never, ever heard anyone, anywhere in the world, partner or consultant or anyone ever tell a client, hey, you got to step back and make sure you're doing it right. Because most people do quite a hard sell of a concept. So I must give you a lot of credit for being very thoughtful about the way clients can hurt themselves if they misuse a concept, because not many people do that.
well, you're very kind. And there's more stories in the book. The book tells several company examples. So hopefully it'll be a good, entertaining read. It comes out May 26th,
Fantastic.
Harvard
I'll get
Business
a
Review
copy.
Press, and it's on pre-order online. You can find it.
Fantastic. I'll make sure I put the details out when we release the podcast. Sarah, I really enjoyed speaking to you. At
Great.
another point, I don't know if you want to do this, but I would like to talk to you about work-life balance. I think it will be an interesting topic if you're interested in doing it.
Yes, probably not until the fall.
No, sure, later, maybe
Um,
towards the end of the year when you've settled down
Give
and
me
back
a
with the
chance to get
baby.
this baby out, and then we'll
Yeah,
talk.
definitely. Look, I really enjoyed speaking to you. Good luck with everything. I'm sure the book's going to be great, and you're going to be a mom for the 5th time. Always good news.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Take
We'll
care.
talk
Ciao.
soon.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing the episode. Finally, I want you to remember that the only way to get access to our special offers, the only way to get our special pricing, and the only way to get samples of our content is to join the list on firmsconsulting.com. It's the only way also to get access to our unique advanced content that we make available to insiders. So if you want to get a sneak peek of things, test it out, see what's in there, this is the place to go. And finally, I want to thank you again for making us one of the largest podcast channels around the world for careers and for the 2 million downloads and counting.